Hi, I'm Alan Oster, NAB's Chief Economist, and I'm here to try and give you an overview of what happened in the 2021 federal budget. I suppose the first thing I'd say is one of the biggest stimulus packages we've ever seen. And so to some extent that was not really unexpected. A couple of the key decisions in the budget, the first one was expected, and that is essentially bringing forward the phase 2 tax cuts. They're worth about 18 billion over 4 years, and backdated it essentially to July this year, which means that essentially you'll be able to get your tax refund on the new rules very quickly. It just has to go through Parliament. The government has not tried to bring forward phase 3, which the opposition was saying they wouldn't agree with. And so therefore, I think you're going to get a fair bit of, and the government's estimated that up to $5,000 per family of additional payments from the tax relief. And that is actually, together with a couple of other things the government's done, led us to essentially put up our GDP forecasts in the near term and reduce the level of unemployment in the near term as well. Having said all that, the biggest item in the budget was actually what we call an instant asset write-off for firms who have turnover of less than $50 billion. It's covering about 99% of Australian firms. And what it essentially says is if you do investment, you can instantly write the full value off. So it's worth about $27 billion. So it's a really big thing in terms of trying to get the economy going. There was also some extra money in terms of essentially if you're under 35 and you were previously unemployed, the government will pay part of your salary. And it's quite a substantial amount of money. And there's also subsidies for new apprentices as well. To me, one of the surprises in the budget was actually that they didn't bring forward these phase 3 tax cuts, and they didn't change the job seeker payments, which is the dole. So they go back, presumably at the end of December, to something like $550, whereas currently they're more like $1,100. The other things that were sort of broadly expected included infrastructure spending. So they've provided an extra $7 billion to the states to do infrastructure, and the Commonwealth themselves can do road infrastructure, which is another $2 billion. They've put in essentially a tax carry-back provision. There's also been some extra help, if you like, for areas in manufacturing and also higher education. Now, the size of the stimulus is around about 7% of GDP. The total budget deficit was more like 10 to 12, but the economy dropped. And so therefore 7% is roughly twice the size of the stimulus that we saw during the GFC. And last year's stimulus was also around about 4% as well. So very, very big fiscal spending. Was the speed of repair in 21-22. They are basically taking the best part of $100 billion out of their spending, mainly because the JobKeeper package has disappeared. And that would actually take a fair bit of economic activity out of the economy, a lot of strength in growth. So when we look at their forecasts, we sort of worry a little bit that they're put on some rosy-coloured glasses. Even so, so what we're seeing, if you like, is we think in 2021, the economy will fall by around 2%. The Treasury is talking about -1.5%. Then we bounce back the economy pretty strongly around about 3.8%, but the Treasury's got 4.7%, which is really quite strong, particularly at a time when they've taken out the JobKeeper. We both see unemployment peaking at around 8%. We think it's in March, they think it's in December. Because they have much stronger growth than us for next year, they're also got unemployment down to 6.5% by the end of mid-22, whereas we think it's nearer to 7%. So I suppose what I'd sort of say is the stimulus package was really strong. We were basically expecting a lot of things in there, but there were a few extras. But we worry that you can't take that amount of money out of the government next year and still keep the economy growing close to 5%. So we're slightly worried about that. The international forecasts are pretty similar. The ones that we normally have problems with the government in terms of wages and prices, they're all very similar to our forecast. So it's really the speed of the recovery next year that is really the big issue. The other thing I should probably say before we go and talk a little bit more about how we're seeing the economy anyway, is that the assumptions that the government is making on the virus, I think, are as good as you can make, in the sense that they're similar to ours, i.e. we think all the states, touch wood, will have opened their borders to interstate by the end of this year. And we would also hope that by the end of next year, international borders might be starting to open. And that's about as good as you can do. It does produce some interesting dynamics. It sort of says in this financial year, the population growth will probably go negative. And what we're actually seeing is more people leaving Australia than coming here. Normally we get up to 150,000 immigrants per year, and now they're talking about 75,000 people leaving the country. So, sorry, 75,000 people leaving the country in the current fiscal year. So I think there's some interesting things about the budget. As I said, I really worry about the scope of for the economy to really bounce away really strongly. So what we're sort of seeing is where we've changed our numbers as a result of this budget, so that we're boosting the growth in the back end of this year. We've still, however, thinking that maybe the December quarter might be very flat, because yes, you do need to get your tax refund, but you'll definitely lose a lot of the income out of JobKeeper and JobSeeker. And therefore, you're also seeing some of the impact of the Victorian close down. It really occurred halfway through the September quarter. It's still occurring, and we worry there's a number of firms out there that essentially won't ever reopen, and so unemployment will go up. As I said, we don't think it'll go up straight away to 8%, but we do think it'll probably get there over the next 3 to 6 months. In terms of what we're seeing in terms of the actual economy, we look at our own data. In other words, we watch to see what's having occurred in every electronic transactions, and we've got it as of last weekend. And what we're seeing is essentially outside of Australia, really strong, outside of Victoria, really strong growth, particularly in Western Australia and Queensland. But Victoria's holding things back. And then we did a business survey that we put out yesterday, and that basically said that business conditions improved quite a lot. So they went from -6 to 0. Long run average is still +6, so they were still not great. But in Western Australia, business conditions were +25, whereas Victoria, they were -14. So you do get this very big difference in terms of what is happening in different parts of the economy. It's encouraging in the sense that it would mean that by hopefully the end of the year, Victoria reopens and starts going reasonably well, but it is also a bit of an issue in terms of what sensitivities we have to the virus in case something goes wrong. In terms of the stimulus that's out there, we're seeing record inflows into consumers' accounts and in terms of their cash balances. However, what we've seen, which I think is interesting, is a lot of the money this year for things like JobKeeper, etc., and also particularly the 2 rounds of withdrawals, early withdrawals of superannuation, were essentially spent in the shops, which is very different to what happened last year. Last year, only about 12 to maybe, if you include money withdrawn out of ATMs, up to 20% of the tax refunds were spent essentially in the shops, whereas this year, in terms of the super payments, around 60% were spent in the shop. So the super payments have acted essentially like a cash drop. And that's why you see a lot of the retailers doing very well. And in our surveys, what we're seeing is retail and wholesale by far the strongest. You'd expect hospitality to be down the bottom, and it is. But the one that sort of worries me a bit is public housing and or general housing, because construction is basically the worst sector we've got as of about a week ago in the economy. So I was slightly disappointed we didn't see more in public housing in terms of the budget. In terms of, as we go forward, as I said, I think the economy will improve. I think the budget position won't be as strong as what the government is talking about. And then people obviously want to know about house prices. Well, house prices have essentially been coming down in Sydney and Melbourne. Other states have been a little bit better, but we would still see somewhere between 5 and 10% further falls in house prices across Australia. The reason for that is the two things that really matter are unemployment, and when it gets to about 8%, that's a real problem. And the other thing is population. And population growth, as I said, could well actually shrink this year, and that is really unprecedented. So the one thing, however, is you'll get different effects across different parts of the country. So if people are into the Zooms and all this sort of internet working from home, that could well mean that they're quite happy if you're in Melbourne to work out of Geelong or Ballarat or Bendigo, if you're in Sydney in the Blue Mountains somewhere. And so you'll get different effects, and people will probably not pay as much for living close to the city as they used to. So it won't be all up and all down, but it will be an issue. The other part of the economy that I think that will really struggle is commercial property and SMEs in the CBD, because I can't really see much more than 50% of workers coming back. It's currently around 10% of workers are back in the office. And I don't really see that improving a lot. And all the stuff, all the business surveys we've done say that commercial property, particularly office and retail in the CBD, is going to be under a lot of stress. There will obviously be other areas that will do much better. Agri's doing really well. It's raining and they're benefiting from people essentially buying their coffees and their meals in restaurants outside of the capital cities. And also manufacturing, there have been boosts. You've seen the government spent $1.5 billion in terms of giving special help to the manufacturing sector. I think anything to do with internet will be strong. Anything that's flowing off infrastructure will be strong. And there was special money, especially for hospitals in the budget. So I think it's a mixed picture, but overall, I think what you should do when you sit back and look at Australia, we've done pretty well in terms of controlling the virus. And we've done a lot better than people think in terms of the damage that has been inflicted by those restrictions. And so we are looking very attractive as a place to come and live eventually. So yes, it's a really tough time for a couple of years. Yes, the budget is still in serious deficit, but it's also giving a lot of support, at least in the short term. But I think in 2 to 3 years' time, a lot of people will want to invest and want to live in Australia. So I see the outlook for Australia as pretty good, but we do need to recognise the trouble that the virus has already caused us. And I think the main theme out of tonight's budget is that the government recognises that. They're not really expecting to see surpluses anytime in the next 6 to 10 years. And I think that's appropriate. So they're my main comments about what I saw on tonight's budget. I hope I've given you some insights that are useful, and I should probably close by saying I hope your business goes well as we go forward, and keep safe, everyone.